Hey there, and welcome to the Divorce Planner Podcast. I'm divorce prep coach Alex Beatty. You're not imagining it. The brain fog, the inability to focus, the way you keep replaying painful conversations on an endless loop. There's actual neuroscience behind what you're experiencing during divorce. Divorce aligns with trauma, and when we experience trauma, our emotional capabilities get stretched thin. Today, I'm talking to neuroscientist Dr. Nicole about what is actually happening in your brain during divorce, and more importantly, what you can do about it. We talk about why your stress hormones are maxed out and you can't access clear thinking when you need it the most, how to break the negative thought loop that keeps you up at 3 a.m., and the power of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to actually rewire itself. If you felt like you're losing it during your divorce, this conversation will help you understand why and what you can do about it. Let's dive in. I was so excited to have this conversation today because I think there's so much out there for people to really be able to take advantage of when you're trying to move through a big life change like a divorce. You can come up against one of the hardest enemies to kind of slay, which is your own thought patterns, right? And because we're all wired to have a negative thought bias, when you're feeling down or going through a tough time, it can just make things feel insurmountable. So Dr. Nicole, who today is going to give us so much great information. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about how to rewire your brain during and after divorce.
Yeah. So thanks for the intro into the mind of what we're going to delve into. And when I think about it, the first thing that we think about when we're talking about the mind is the emotional saliency. So when we're thinking about going through a divorce, there's elements that it does align with trauma. And it really falls into the category of what you're talking about, that inner critic, that negativity bias gets ramped up when we're experiencing trauma because basically our emotional capabilities are out of the norm. We're not able to access that frontal cortex, which allows us for that not only just executive decision making and planning, which is a big part of what you're talking about, the pragmatics of getting a divorce, but also like the emotions behind it, because all of a sudden money becomes very emotional. Everything, maybe that simple book you bought, at a bookstore when you were in college together becomes the point of contention, and it's a book, right? And so when we're talking about that inner critic, I call it the monster, that, and it sort of comes out as this like puppet. And the more that we can externalize that inner critic and detach from it being inside of us, the better we can kind of maneuver and get through the emotional waves that are happening and kind of become a little bit more grounded when we're dealing with these difficult challenges.
It's so true. And I think it's really surprising to people who are going through a big life challenge like a separation or a divorce that you find that there are a lot of outside voices in the process as it is. So it's like you have to navigate almost like a minefield of other people's opinions and thoughts about what's going on in your life. And then when we find sometimes that the loudest voice can be in our own head, it can just feel, if you're disconnected from understanding that's within your control, it just feels like a pylon, right, that you can't get out from under. And so that's one aspect. And then there's the other aspect of, like, I hear people all the time, who, whether it's somebody who's just confiding in me or a client who, when they're going through a divorce, they feel like they can't focus, they forget things, they feel foggy. It's like there's actually some stuff, as you said, the trauma that's actually having an effect on your brain. So it's like, what is happening to your brain when you're going through a big traumatic event?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What's happening is basically the stress hormones. So cortisol and the adrenaline are just kind of at their highest level. And what we have to think about is our natural patterns of how we react to stress when we were children. This kind of really happened how we were programmed. I mean, we have a nature component to a point where we came in this way, but we've developed stress patterns in relation to how we grew up into from our nuclear family. And so when we fall into that, we can fall into 4 to 5 main categories: fight, flight, freeze, flop, and fawn. And when we fall into those deep categories, we have these natural patterns and behaviors that we experience over and over. So, like the fighters and flyers are going to be people who get that energy out. They move, they're really strong and powerful. The freezers and the ones that are just floppers are going to be kind of on their back. And that's what you're talking about with the brain fog. We know that when the inflammatory process happens, not only in our brain, but throughout our body, it becomes a cyclical thing. So you're also going to have like headaches, stomach aches, nausea. You're going to adjust your eating patterns, like your feeding patterns are going to change. You're going to use it much more as like a reward system, perhaps, or you're going to avoid food. And so it really depends on your personal presets. But that brain fog, when you're thinking about it, I always love what Thich Nhat Hanh talks about when he talks about when an animal is injured. And mental injury is still an injury, as it is a physical injury. We get pain in our brain is activated in the same area for physical pain and emotional pain and mental pain. So pain is pain. And what he really says is that you think about an animal when they get injured in the forest. What do? They lie down. They're not going to run around and start hunting and trying to do a million different things. And so we as humans, because we have big brains, we create big brain problems for ourselves and we don't stop. And so that cyclical of going through these stress patterns kind of exacerbates, and it doesn't just affect our brain, but it affects our entire body. And what you're talking about, that functioning, you have that gut brain connection that happens as well. We have the size of a cat brain that's in our gut. We get most of our neurotransmitters for dopamine, which is like 50% from our gut. We get 90% from our gut, which is serotonin. That's our feel good hormone. So if our gut feels terrible, like our brain, we're going to have that continued brain fog and that stress response sort of ruling us.
I mean, the cortisol was something, yes. I mean, you want to be able to keep cortisol in check because that too much of that can cause real damage on your body if you're in this constant fight or flight. And you nailed exactly why, especially the financial change. It's like if you're stressed, you can get locked in these loops, right? And you talking about the stomach to the brain makes perfect sense because we feel that pit in our stomach all the time. I know that I had a period where I did. And what I realized, as you also touched on, was it really can trigger part of our history, familial, like these relationship patterns that we've absorbed. And maybe we're even repeating in how we're picking who to have relationships with. And then we get to a point where you're ending something, even if you think, oh my gosh, it was 35, 40 years ago since I was in that kind of dynamic, you can still get pulled right back subconsciously into dealing with things from a way that you would have dealt with as a child and not even realize it. So it's like, what do you do? And let's get to the heart of it. What do you do? How do you snap yourself out if you find yourself like obsessing over and over again? What can we do to get out of these loops?
So the biggest thing to get out of a loop is pause and take a really deep breath. The first thing is you need to breathe. So most of the time when we're experiencing these cyclical thoughts, our brain and body are going beyond that continued pattern that we're used to. And so when we can take that pause, we take a breath, we can get present where we're really safe because we're running through these cycles in our brain because we think we're not safe. We're afraid that we're going to hurt. We're afraid that we're anticipating even future hurt. We're anticipating future worry. We're anticipating, and it's all fear based. So rumination is in alignment with fear. And so when we can acknowledge what need that needs to be met in that moment for us to feel safe is really critical. So in that moment, we can have all of these thoughts like, oh my gosh, all my money's going to go away. I don't know how I'm going to live. I'm going to, and go in that. And then the reality is, well, that's future worry. it's definitely something to pinpoint and also hold on to, but not have it be the number one thing that's ruling your day. Because if you're responding out of fear at every single moment, you're not going to have the groundedness to be able to actually appropriately advocate for yourself and what your needs are in that moment. So, most importantly, is to ground, breathe, and also to have really an alliance, have a friend that you could call and say, hey, man, I'm triggered right now. I need to help you talk me through this. Because the truth of the matter is, we need people. I would like to say, like, all at the end of the day, like, yes, we can regulate our nervous system, find our home within, we can breathe, and we can have that regulation. That takes a lot of time and practice. And that's what Buddhist monks do. That's what sadhus do. But in everyday life, we need other people. And so, really having a dear friend that you could call and say, hey, look, this is happening right now. I need some support. I need you to catch me. I need you to let me know what I'm thinking isn't like batty. And then they can acknowledge that. So, I think that aloneness and what you talked about, like the stories of our families, the stories of our friends, like, oh my gosh, why are you getting divorced? You guys are a perfect couple. You guys are perfect. We see your pictures on Instagram all the time, or whatever it may be. And it's like we've grown apart. And a big part, too, I had one psychology professor say that I thought was really funny. Was part of the reason we get married is we're working through clearing our patterns from our childhood. And so it's this residue where we do pick partners that resonate with patterns that we're used to. And that's kind of a big part of the restoring of when we think about who we want to become in the next layer of our life. Divorces usually tend to happen midlife because there is an awakening for a new story and a new life to be born. But most importantly, we have to understand what those initial patterns and triggers are before we jump into a new relationship.
Oh my gosh, so much good stuff to unpack in that. Yes, of course, the power of pause is the most important thing when you're stuck. If you feel like you're stuck in that like negative loop, being as kind to yourself as possible can be a really important way to kind of reframe the narrative and just questioning, in itself, then you'll start to see the pattern more clearly of like, oh, this is just the brain is doing its own thing. And I have to remind my brain that the brain works for me. I don't work for my brain.
We'll be back after a quick break. Feeling overwhelmed about the possibility of a divorce and not sure where to start? Book a free 15-minute strategy call with me. During our time, we'll talk about where you are in the process and what next steps could be. To schedule your call and learn more about my coaching program, head over to www.thedivorceplanner.net/coaching. Let's get back to today's episode.
I'm a big fan of Carl Jung and about the possibilities in midlife. I do think, the largest segment of the population goes through divorce is firmly people who are in midlife and at 50 and up. And there is a reason for that. And so when you go to things like fear, there's only one way to tackle that. Focus on what's in your control and get as prepared as possible on the things that are triggering that, and crunch the number of your life, figuring out how much you have coming in and going out, and then make a plan for how you see things changing after divorce. And then you can tell your brain, I checked that off the list. We're okay, giving it that evidence that it really needs. But can we talk a little bit more about midlife awakening and how divorce can be such a powerful catalyst towards that change? Even what you're saying, and I think we've all heard this, it's like, oh, you end up marrying your parents, right? Like you all hear that, and how you pick a partner. It's true. And when you get to a point of divorce, look, the truth of the matter is things haven't usually been working for a while, especially in long-term relationships. There can be an average of 2 to 5 years where people are struggling. They don't know what's going on. Being able to use your divorce as a catalyst for some deep introspection and to kind of get a little more honest about, why did I pick this partner? Maybe why did I stay in these situations? Is your opportunity to really grow. And it's not fun work. It's important work and it's hard work. What are some tips on neuroplasticity that if you are going through this period of time in your life in an aware way, what are some tools that people can take with them to help give them the building blocks for that change as they're going through their awakening?
So, what you said I thought was really important when we're talking about checking the facts. I just wanted to pin back to that because so much of the time, the worry that we have is I want to tell you scientifically, 90% of our worries never come true. So, they're not factually based. And it's probably even less than that. I would say probably it's closer to 95%, but 90% is what scientific evidence. And when we think about that and we think about what you're saying in terms of restoring and this awakening in our lives, is the awareness that sometimes we marry somebody because it's easy and it's the automatic pattern and it's obvious because they fit so well into the family dynamic. Sometimes it's the opposite, right? Like it starts out where it's like, no way. But the deal when we're thinking about that midlife awakening that people are going through, I don't want to say that you're going to automatically marry the same type of person. There could be a lot of awareness where you and that person in that relationship really have an expiration date. And like, if you think about it, all of us have a final expiration date. So when we're thinking about relationships, all relationships are going to change. The reality is that as we get into midlife, what happens is with that awakening, kids move away, maybe never had kids, but there is this awareness that you got half your life left to live, and there are things that you want to get done. And the real issue is you need to have a partner that is willing to grow with you where you're going to diverge and come back. So it's this kind of flowing in and out of relation. And if you have a partner who's not on board with that, then that's where you can really begin to nurture yourself and recognize what you want out of life is valid. Because waking up every day and not wanting to be there, that's not really a worth life living. And so the important thing is like first have compassion for yourself that this has come up. It's a really hard, rude awakening. And at the same time, you're not alone. There are friends, there's divorce coaches like you, there are people who can guide you through the process. So begin with compassion and then really focus on what is it that is inside of you that's calling you for this next awakening for your life. Where do you see that vision for that restoring happening? And when we can begin to do that, no matter what, your brain is plastic. We have the ability to write new stories. We have the ability to change the way we think about things. A lot of people sometimes they get into these very end states of the divorce and then they realize, no, this isn't it. This is going to stick, and they figure that new pathway. There's other ways, or there's people who are like, no, I'm out. And so it's really figuring out, finding the people that can support you along the way, reimagining what you want for your life, and knowing that what you want is valid and trusting that it's valid. And also having really a lot of compassion for yourself through the process.
Going back to when you're going through this kind of experience, the compassion that you need to be giving yourself needs to extend to every aspect of your life, right? And giving yourself the support that you need, but also realizing that this kind of journey and this kind of healing isn't a one and done proposition. This is the reason that therapy works really well for us humans, because we do well by talking things out over and over again. And I know sometimes it's really hard for us to allow ourselves that grace. We think we should be getting over things faster, or, that we're going to wear out our welcome, maybe talking to that friend or whoever it might be. But being able to give yourself the grace and a kindness during this time that you would give to a friend is the order of the day, because this is a big transformation. And I love that you brought up that sometimes things have their expiration date, which is true. There's that great saying, some for a reason, some for a season, and being able to use the divorce as a catalyst for change, as a catalyst for the introspection, really then become the main character in your life in a way that really authentically aligns with who you are now, is the way you should be living your life. Full stop, right? Like we get one go round. Like if you're doing anything other than really representing yourself and taking care of yourself in that way, you're not going to get that time back.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Subscribe to the Divorce Planner's weekly newsletter and get divorce prep tips, financial planning tools, and expert insights delivered discreetly to your inbox. Sign up at www.thedivorceplanner.net. Let's get back to today's episode.
When you've been let's be honest, if you're getting a divorce, it's not been, a great relationship for quite some time. And sometimes you have to continue co-parenting with somebody like that. But like anything, when you've done something over and over again, it's deeply ingrained, a pattern. You're going to say this, I'm going to feel this way, I'm going to react this way. So it's like for people who are trying to co-parent with a difficult ex, how do you train your brain to not react every time they say something or react differently when you've got this history well worn into your neurons and your dynamic?
So this comes back to when we were talking about trauma. And I didn't get to bring up that after trauma and after this awakening that somebody experiences through restoring, is we have a process called post-traumatic growth that happens in our brain, which allows for new wiring, new neuroplasticity, and new patterns to be developed. So when you're thinking about your child and you're thinking about your partner and or ex-partner, and the fact that you have to be in constant contact because you have this person you brought into the world, when you can come back to the story that the most important thing is your relationship and how you treat your child, and that your child's needs come above anything else, then you can actually make that a motivation for yourself to not fall into these reactionary patterns. Granted, that doesn't mean that, your ex-partner, where they're supposed to show up, they show up an hour and a half late. But the difference is maybe in the past you would have screamed, you've blown up. You could say, not cool, hold it, work through that rewiring where that emotional reactivity doesn't happen, and really rewire a new pattern so your child could see that you are not responding from a pattern of anger or fear or frustration, but you're actually from a higher order thinking where you have that balance and you're like, okay, I got you. We're going now. And maybe it comes out in an email later. Maybe it comes out in a really different way. But the thing is that we can allow for ourselves to rewire where these reactionary patterns aren't going to be coming up. Because ultimately, the choice to end the relationship in the marriage is to move on. So part of our work or anybody's work when they're making that sort of decision is they have to decide that I'm not going to fall victim to my patterns. And I'm going to rewire something new. And each time, I know it's hard, each time you rewire that new pattern, you get a new groove in your brain again and again and again, where all of a sudden it's like they're late and you're like, oh yeah, this is normal. And it's almost like it doesn't phase you anymore. And you can manage yourself and not fall into those patterns. But really, the point of removing yourself in that relationship is to not react that way anymore. So if you see that reactivity happening, you have an ability to say, I can pause this right now. I could stop this right now and I don't have to keep doing it.
I love that we're talking about the dynamic with somebody else and how when you're set in certain patterns, you do have the ability to charge a whole new way that you think about things and how you are reacting in this well-worn dynamic. And look, one of the big buzziest words that gets thrown around in the divorce space, and I know beyond as well, is this idea of, oh, my partner's a narcissist. And what I'm always talking to clients about is taking your power back is the first worst way when you're dealing with a high conflict person that we're really dealing with. But when you put the power back to yourself, and it starts with what you said at the top with that pause is a gift that you're giving yourself, because you're already like, when you have that self-awareness, here we go again, or I'm feeling triggered. And then you make a different action, which is like, instead of being reactive immediately in the moment, you take that pause, you process, ooh, this is really pressing my buttons and I want to yell at somebody, but instead you don't. Scientifically, it's shown you're starting to create a whole new way that your brain is going to respond even in that moment. And that's something I'm trying to hammer home to anybody who's listening right now, because sometimes it feels so impossible. Oh, this is never going to end, or I have to deal with this person. But the power's in you, right? Like, it's not about you pointing a finger at the other person and saying, here's what's wrong with you. Here's how you have to change. Here's what you're not. That's never going to happen. You're getting divorced for a reason. The only thing you have control over is yourself and how you react to situations. And so, like, having that intellectual understanding that's backed by science, this is everything that Dr. Nicole is talking about, means it's actually doable. And so when it comes to that buzzy word of dealing with a narcissist, it's about reclaiming your power. And this is the way you reclaim your power. I just kind of want to wrap up with one more question, which is like specifically what we're just talking about, which is, if somebody is listening to this right now and they're thinking, okay, I want to do this, what's the first step for them? Like, what's one thing that they can do today that's actually going to start to make a difference in how they then are rewiring their brain and certain dynamics going through a divorce?
A simple thing is write the intention of what you want that new pattern to be. That's simple. I intend to not blow up every time X is late, And if that's it, and then you blow up, you're like, I blew up this time. Compassion. I'm a work in progress. But when you were talking about partners being narcissists, the other thing too is like, they always do this, they always do that. That's a form of a cognitive distortion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this all or nothing thinking. And so when we can pull ourselves out more and more of these all or nones, or, I always react this way, when we can take that and say, okay, I react 80% of the time, and we can pull ourselves out of that cognitive distortion, that really helps. So writing our intention, that restoring. So it's every day, one little thing that you want to grow, you could restore, you could have gratitude. I woke up today, I have water, I have food, It's really the intention. If you want to focus on not being reactive, or you want to call in gratitude, gratitude for the awakening that this is hard.
Which goes back to exactly what you keep saying, hammering home, compassion. Dr. Nicole, I love that you gave us that activity, that action to take, which is to write down your intention and just to remind yourself, like, this isn't a one and done. Your awareness is the first step. Your inclination to want to change things is a part of that. And then writing that intention down and coming back to it, and just understanding that this is going to be a process, and giving yourself that extra kindness is the way to go. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you. This was an awesome conversation. I so appreciate you and the work you're doing to help people in the world find a restory and hope and life, post-traumatic growth, and
Exactly.
and really enjoy their awakening for their next phase of their life.
That's a wrap on today's episode. I hope you found it helpful. For more free resources, check out my blog at www.thedivorceplanner.net/blog. You'll find articles on how to emotionally and financially prepare for divorce, gain insights into the process from divorce experts, and empower yourself with tips and tools that make your divorce journey easier. And you can follow me on Instagram at the.divorce.planner, on Facebook at Divorce Prep, and on YouTube at The Divorce Planner for daily divorce prep tips and support. I'm Alex Beatty, and this has been the Divorce Planner Podcast. Until next time, remember, divorce is hard. Preparing for one doesn't have to be.